Hello, I am Bob, and this is the Home Bitcoin Immersion Mining channel. In this design series episode, I'm going to cover some ways to keep your immersion system working throughout the year. So with that, let's get started. But before getting on with the video, I want to mention some sponsors of the channel, the first being Brains. Now, when you are setting up your home miners, one of the big decisions to make is which mining pool to join, and the Brains pool is a great option here. The Brains team has been operating pools longer than pretty much everyone else. They have a great website and app, making it easy to set up your miners, monitor your operations, or set up notifications. And with paired using the Brains OS firmware on your miners, the pool fees are completely waived. The Brains pool is what I use for my mining, and it's a pool you definitely should check out. And last up is the mining hardware supplier for the channel, Altair Bitcoin Mining Solutions. Altair is your one-stop shop for any mining hardware you might need. They have everything from the latest and greatest miners to every hashboard, cable, and part you might need to repair your existing hardware or build your own 120-volt home-built miner. Altair has years of experience working in the Bitcoin mining industry, running their own mining farm, and they've worked with all different scales of mining operations. Altair is based in the US and has top-rated customer support. And so if you have any question about anything at any time, they are there to help you out. Altair is a huge supporter of the home mining community, so if you're looking to buy your next miner or miner parts for your home setup, check out their website at the link below. You'll find pretty much everything you'll ever need. Okay, so running a home mining system throughout the year can be kind of tricky. Each season brings its own challenging to keep the miners cool and to effectively use the heat produced by the miners around the home. In the summer, there can be very little heat for need around the home. If you are using mining heat to heat your water, maybe that's all there is. In contrast, in the winter months, a cold home can absorb a ton of heat from an immersion system. And the problem here can be directing that heat where you need it and possibly not having enough heat to keep those lines from freezing, particularly if you have an outdoor dry cooler. And when it comes to the spring and fall seasons, although there aren't temperature extremes, there is a lot of variation in temperature. In many parts of the country, including here in Colorado, the spring and fall seasons can have wide daily springs in temperature, where at night and in early mornings it's cold and home heating is needed, and in the late afternoon and evenings it gets warm enough where home heating is not needed, and it might even get hot enough to where air conditioning is being used. Keeping up with this intraday variability can wreak havoc on a mining cooling system. So with all of this year-round variation, what can we do as home miners to keep our immersion system up and running and stacking sats? Well, it turns out there are a number of things we can do. And the first and easiest way to manage cooling variability is to install aftermarket firmware on your miners. The stock firmware on Bitmain and other miners has limited ability to react to temperature cooling changes. Stock firmware just keeps the miners on and keeps them running at a constant power level regardless of what is happening. In contrast, aftermarket firmware can have auto-tuning and performance scaling capabilities. When you set this up correctly, your miners can automatically ramp up and down, reacting in real time to temperature and cooling changes. You can set your miners to overclock and run with higher power levels when cooling is available, and you can set temperature safety levels lower than stock values to protect your miners when the cooling isn't quite enough. Now, I use Brains OS on all of my miners. They are a sponsor of the channel, but I'd still be using them if they weren't. Their software is easy to install, easy to use, and they are constantly updating it to keep up with the latest and greatest Bitmain miners. I highly recommend using it on your mining hardware. And if you want to learn more about how auto-tuning and performance scaling work and how to set them up on your miners, I covered all of this in detail in another episode. I put a link below so you can give it a watch. Now, installing aftermarket firmware is your first line of defense against cooling and temperature variations. But there are a number of other measures you can take to make your system more robust, and the options here really depend on the overall architecture of your home system. As I've covered in past episodes, a home mining system can be designed to run all the time or only when heat is needed. Both designs will work, and it's up to you to decide what is the best option for your home setup. I have a link below to my design playlist where I cover all of these different options and the advantages and disadvantages of each type of system. Now, taking a quick look at mining setups that are only running when heat is needed, here the miners will be off when the heat isn't needed, and so there won't be any extra heat to dissipate during the warmer months. The big question here is how the control system switching your miner on and off decides when that switch is made, and there are a few different options here. You can use an outdoor temperature sensor and just follow the weather. This can work, but you could get erratic behavior if you have a spring or fall storm blow through, which might trick your system into rapidly turning on and off your miners. You could also measure your immersion fluid temperature and directly follow the cooling capability of the system. This can also work, but you'd need to keep the fluid circulating at all times, and if this isn't designed correctly, the system could oscillate on and off when only a little heat is needed. A final option, and I think the one that will likely work best, is to connect your miners to your home thermostat. This way, your miners will simply turn on when you need the heat and turn off when you don't. Again, I have a full episode covering how thermostats work and how to connect them to your mining setup. There's a link below if you want to learn more. Now, the other type of home mining setup is one where the miners are kept on all the time. In this type of design, there has to be a dry cooler or other radiator built into the system to dissipate the extra heat to the environment. And so the challenge here is to optimize the use of that dry cooler. You want to maximize the cooling by the dry cooler when you have extra heat, and you want to minimize the cooling by the dry cooler when the heat is really needed. Now, there are a few options here. You can hook up a bypass with a manual valve to control how much fluid goes through the dry cooler and how much passes by. But the downside here is you have to stay on top of your system operation, constantly opening and closing or adjusting that valve depending on how much heat is needed. A second option is to build a control system and use electrically powered valves. If designed correctly, this can work really well. You can hook this up to a thermocouple monitoring fluid temperature, and the dry cooler bypass can then be switched on and off reacting to system needs. Now, the downside here is you'll have to learn how to build a home automation system. But this is really not a huge deal. There's folks out there like Michael Schmidt from Nakamoto Heating Solutions who have figured this out and have open source code available if you want to take this on. Now, a third option is to use a mixing valve to control how much fluid bypasses the dry cooler. I really like this option because it's kind of bulletproof. The mixing valve continuously adjusts how much fluid flows through the dry cooler, and I've been using a mixing valve in my home setup for over a year through all 4 seasons, and it's been great. In the winter, my dry cooler isn't being used at all, and the heat generated by my miners was completely kept within my home. And through this summer, the dry cooler was being fully utilized to keep my miners from overheating. And in the spring and fall, the fluid flow through my dry cooler was automatically modulated throughout the day, following the temperature swings of that time of year. And during all of this time, I haven't had to do a thing. It just works completely automatically. And if you want more information about how a mixing valve works and how I built one into my system, I cover the details in other episodes. The links are below. Now, another big part of system design is controlling how much fluid flows through the radiators and heat exchangers, which dump heat into different parts of your home system. You want to make sure that warm fluid goes where you want it, when you want. Now, the options here are very similar to the options I just covered for dry cooler fluid control. You can use manual valves, you can use home automation with electrically powered valves, and you can integrate your system with home thermostats for control. But one unique option that I really like to use is a thermostatic valve to modulate the fluid flow. Similar to a mixing valve, a thermostatic valve will continuously adjust the fluid flow following fluid temperature, allowing more fluid through a radiator or heat exchanger when you need it, and restricting fluid flow when you don't need the heat. I've been using this type of valve in my garage heater, and again, it's been awesome. I just set the valve to return cool fluid back to my miner when I initially built that part of my home system, and I haven't had to touch anything since then. It automatically matched the fluid flow in the winter when my garage needed all the heat it could get, and as we moved into the spring, the valve modulated the flow throughout the daily temperature swings. And this all worked automatically. I didn't have to do a thing. And just like everything else I've covered, I have a link below to an episode if you want more information on how thermostatic valves work and how I built one into my home system. So when you are building your home system, the seasonal variation in temperature really isn't as big of a deal as you might think. There are a ton of design tools you can use to make your system take care of itself for hands-off year-round operation. And if you're looking for more information and ideas for designing your home mining setup, click here.